What happens when a beloved sitcom star walks onto a talk show expecting a friendly chat, only to find herself in the middle of an unexpected controversy that forces her to speak truths she's kept quiet for decades? Today, we're breaking down the moment Courtney Cox had enough on The View. And what she said will shock you. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about this whole situation. Trust me, you're going to want to weigh in on this one. The View studio audience was buzzing with the usual pre-show energy as Courtney Cox walked onto the set. The actress, known for her iconic role as Monica Geller and her recent resurgence in the Scream franchise, was there to promote her latest project. Whoopi Goldberg led the introductions, and the panel seemed genuinely excited to have her there. Courtney Cox, welcome back to The View, Whoopi said warmly as the audience applauded. Thank you so much for having me, Courtney replied, settling into her seat with a comfortable smile. It's always great to be here. The conversation started pleasantly enough. Sarah Haynes asked about her new production company, and Sunny Holland brought up her daughter, Coco. Courtney answered each question with the practiced ease of someone who'd done thousands of interviews. Everything seemed perfectly routine until Joy Behar leaned forward with that particular look that regular viewers know all too well. The one that signals she's about to say something provocative. So, Courtney Joy began, her tone casual, but carrying an edge. I have to ask you something that's been on my mind. You've had this incredible career. You were on one of the most successful shows in television history, but let's be honest here. You were always kind of the forgettable one, weren't you? I mean, when people think Friends, they think Jennifer Aniston. They think about Rachel's hair. Nobody really thinks about Monica first. The studio went noticeably quiet. Alyssa Farah Griffin's eyes widened slightly, and even Whoopi shifted in her seat. Courtney's smile didn't fade, but something changed in her expression. A subtle hardening around her eyes. I'm sorry, Joy, Courtney said. Her voice still measured. Did you just call me forgettable? Joy waved her hand dismissively. Oh, come on. You know what I mean? It's not personal. It's just observation. Jennifer became America's sweetheart. Got all the movie roles, the tabloid covers, everything. You kind of just, faded into the background. Even Lisa Kudrow had her moment with the comeback. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Are you, though? Courtney's tone remained calm, but there was steel underneath now. Are you saying what everyone's thinking, Joy? Or are you saying what you've been thinking and assuming everyone agrees with you? Joy laughed, but it sounded forced. Well, I think the evidence speaks for itself. How many magazine covers were you on compared to Jennifer? How many leading movie roles did you get after Friends ended? I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just being honest. Sunny Hostin jumped in, clearly trying to redirect. I think what Joy might be trying to ask about is how you navigated the different trajectories that you and your castmates had after the show ended. But Courtney wasn't looking at Sunny. Her eyes were locked on Joy now. And when she spoke, her voice was sharper. No, Sunny. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but let's not soften what Joy just said. She called me forgettable. She said. I faded into the background. And you know what, Joy? I'm going to answer you, but I'm going to answer honestly, not with some polite media-trained response that lets you off the hook for what you just said. The audience was completely silent now. This wasn't the direction anyone expected this interview to go. Alyssa and Sarah exchanged glances, and Whoopi leaned back in her chair, watching carefully, but not interrupting. Go ahead, Joyce said, attempting to maintain her confident demeanor, but clearly not expecting this level of pushback. I'm all ears. Courtney took a visible breath. You want to talk about being forgettable? Let's talk about what it actually means to be a woman in Hollywood. You want to know why Jennifer got more magazine covers? It wasn't because she was more talented, Joy. It was because she fit a very specific beauty standard that the industry was obsessed with in the 90s and 2000s. The hair, the figure, the whole package, and yes, she's beautiful and talented, and I love her dearly. But let's not pretend the system that elevated her over other women was based purely on merit. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Courtney held up a hand. I'm not finished. You asked, so you're going to listen. You know what I did while I wasn't getting magazine covers? I worked. I did television movies. I guest starred on shows. I took roles in independent films that nobody saw, but that I believed in. I produced content. I developed projects. I stayed active in this industry without needing to be on the cover of People magazine every other week to validate my existence. But that's exactly my point. Joy interjected. You did television movies and guest spots while Jennifer was doing major motion pictures and becoming a household name beyond friends. And that makes me forgettable. Courtney's voice rose slightly for the first time. Joy, do you know how many actresses from successful TV shows never work again after their series ends? Do you have any idea how difficult it is to have any career at all in this industry past a certain age? But I'm forgettable because I didn't become Jennifer Aniston. Sarah tried to step in. I think we're all fans of both of you and everyone from Friends. Maybe we should talk about your new project, but Courtney wasn't done. And surprisingly, Whoopi gave her the space to continue.
No, Sarah.
I want to address this because Joy doesn't get to throw out an insult disguised as an observation and then move on like it didn't mean anything. You called me forgettable on national television. Joy, you compared my entire career unfavorably to my friend's career, as if there's only room for one of us to have mattered. Do you do that to men? Do you go up to, I don't know, Matt LeBlanc and tell him he's forgettable because he didn't become George Clooney? Joy's face flushed slightly. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it though? Courtney leaned forward now, matching Joy's earlier posture. Because it sounds to me like you're perpetuating the exact same garbage that women in Hollywood have been fighting against for decades. The idea that there's only room for one successful woman from any project and everyone else is just background noise. That's the mentality that keeps women competing against each other instead of supporting each other. The tension in the studio was palpable. Alyssa looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the right words. Sunny was nodding slightly, seeming to agree with Courtney's points, even as the conversation grew more heated. I think you're being overly sensitive, Joy said, and immediately the energy in the room shifted again. Courtney actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. There it is, the classic dismissal. A woman stands up for herself and suddenly she's being overly sensitive. Joy, you've built your career on saying controversial things and pushing boundaries. But the second someone pushes back against you, we're being too sensitive. I say controversial things about politicians and policies. Joy countered. That's different from personal attacks, which is what you're accusing me of. You called me forgettable on television. Courtney repeated, her voice hard. How is that not personal? Whoopi finally spoke up. Okay, ladies. I think we need to take a breath here. Joy, maybe you could clarify what you meant because I think Courtney has a point about how that came across. Joy shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable with being put on the spot by both Whoopi and Courtney. Look, all I meant was that in the public consciousness, some members of the Friends cast have remained more visible than others. That's just a fact. A fact? Courtney's voice cut through Joy's attempt at backpedaling. Joy, calling something a fact doesn't make it less insulting. You know what else is a fact? You've been on television for decades, and a lot of people would say your comedy hasn't aged particularly well. Should I just announce that on air and call it an observation? The audience gasped. This wasn't just pushback anymore. This was a full confrontation, and nobody seemed quite sure how to handle it. Joy's face went from flushed to pale in an instant. Excuse me. Joy's voice was tight now, defensive. That's completely uncalled for. Is it? Courtney wasn't backing down. Because I'm just making an observation, Joy. I'm just saying what some people think. Isn't that what you said you were doing? Or does it only work one way? You get to comment on my career and my visibility, but I can't comment on yours. Sunny jumped in, her lawyer instincts clearly kicking in. I think what we're seeing here is a really important conversation about how women in entertainment are discussed and compared. Courtney, I hear what you're saying about the double standard.
Thank you, Sunny.
Courtney said, her eyes still fixed on Joy, because that's exactly what this is. Joy sits here every day and talks about holding people accountable, about speaking truth to power, about not letting things slide. But the moment someone holds her accountable for something dismissive and reductive, she said, suddenly I'm being too sensitive. Suddenly, I'm overreacting. Joy found her footing again, leaning back with her arms crossed. You know what, Courtney? Maybe you're being too sensitive. Maybe the reason you're so upset is because there's some truth to what I said. Maybe you do feel like you got overshadowed, and instead of owning that, you're attacking me for pointing it out. The studio went completely silent. Even Whoopi looked stunned by what Joy had just said. Alyssa's mouth was literally hanging open, but Courtney didn't explode the way Joy seemed to expect. Instead, she got very, very calm. You want me to own something, Joy? Courtney's voice was dangerously quiet now. Fine, I'll own it. Yes, there were times when it was hard to watch Jennifer get opportunity after opportunity, while I had to fight for every single role. Yes, there were times when I felt invisible despite being on one of the biggest shows in television history. Yes, it hurt. I'll own all of that. She paused, and the audience was hanging on every word. But here's what I won't own. I won't own your narrative that feeling those things makes me forgettable or less than. I won't own the idea that my career is somehow a failure because it doesn't look like someone else's career. And I absolutely will not own your right to come at me with backhanded comments disguised as questions and then act shocked when I defend myself. Joy tried to interrupt, but Courtney kept going. You know what the real difference is between Jennifer and me, Joy? It's not talent. It's not work ethic. It's that she got lucky with the roles that came after Friends, and I had to create my own luck. She got offered romantic comedies where she could play the lead. I got offered the best friend role in those same movies. She got action films. I got horror films, which, by the way, the industry treats as less legitimate, even though they make just as much money and require just as much skill. The Scream franchise is hardly something to complain about, Joyce shot back. You've made millions from those movies. I'm not complaining about Scream, Courtney said sharply. I love those movies. I'm proud of those movies. What I'm complaining about is people like you who act like horror is somehow less important than whatever you decide counts as prestigious. You know who watches horror movies, Joy? Millions of people. You know who loves the Scream franchise? Generations of fans who grew up with those films. But sure, let's pretend that doesn't count as much as whatever Jennifer Aniston movie you think is more important. Alyssa finally found her voice. I think Courtney is making a really valid point about how we value different genres and different types of success in Hollywood. Not everyone has to follow the same path. Thank you, Alyssa, Courtney said, though her focus remained on Joy. But I want to go back to something Joy said earlier, because it's really bothering me. You said I faded into the background. Joy, I've been working consistently for 30 years. I've produced multiple shows. I've directed. I've built a production company. I've mentored young actresses. I've used my platform and my money to support causes I believe in. But because I'm not on the cover of US Weekly every month, I faded into the background. Joy spread her hands. I'm talking about public visibility, Courtney. I'm not attacking your character or your work ethic. Yes, you are. Courtney countered immediately. You absolutely are. Because you're saying that the only work that matters is the work that gets you tabloid coverage and magazine spreads. You're saying that unless you're at a certain level of fame, your career doesn't count. Do you know how damaging that is? Do you know how many talented actresses hear that message and think they've failed because they're not A-list celebrities? Sunny nodded vigorously. That's a really important point. The definition of success shouldn't be so narrow. But it is narrow. Joy argued. I didn't create the system. I'm just commenting on it. If Courtney has a problem with how Hollywood works, she should take it up with Hollywood, not with me for acknowledging reality. Courtney actually laughed again, and this time it was almost disbelieving. You're really going to sit there and act like you're just an innocent observer. Joy, you're part of the media. You're part of the machine that creates these narratives. When you sit on this show and call someone forgettable, you're not just commenting on the system, you're participating in it. You're reinforcing it. That's not fair, Joy protested. It's completely fair, Courtney shot back. You have a platform. You have an audience. What you say matters whether you want it to or not. And when you use that platform to diminish someone's career, you don't get to hide behind just making observations. You're making judgments.
Joy.
And those judgments have weight. Whoopi held up her hands. Okay, I'm going to step in here because I think we're at a point where we need to really hear each other. Joy, I'm going to be honest with you. I think Courtney has a point. The way you framed that question was dismissive, and I can understand why she's upset. Joy turned to Whoopi, clearly not expecting this. Whoopi, come on. You know I didn't mean it the way she's taking it. But that's the problem, Whoopi said gently but firmly. It doesn't matter what you meant if what you said was hurtful. And I think if you really listen to what Courtney is saying, she's not just upset about one comment. She's talking about a pattern about how women get talked about in this industry. And she's right. Joy looked around the table, seeming to realize she wasn't going to find support from her co-hosts. Fine. Maybe I could have phrased it better. But I still think we should be able to have honest conversations about celebrity and fame without people getting so defensive. There's a difference between an honest conversation and an insult. Joy, Courtney said. Her voice had lost some of its sharp edge, but she wasn't softening her position. If you had asked me how I navigated different career opportunities than my castmates, that would be an honest conversation. But you didn't. You said I was forgettable. You said I faded. Those aren't neutral observations. Those are value judgments, and they're negative ones. Sarah, who had been mostly quiet, finally spoke up. Can I just say that I think this is actually a really important conversation because how many times do women get pitted against each other like this? How many times do we see female co-stars compared in ways that male co-stars never are? Exactly. Courtney agreed, finally looking away from Joy to address Sarah. Nobody ever asked Matt LeBlanc why he wasn't as successful as George Clooney after nobody asked the guys from that 70s show why they didn't all become Ashton Kutcher. But women, we get asked constantly why we're not as successful as whoever the media decided is the most successful woman from our show, Alyssa added. And there's always this implication that there's only room for one woman to really make it, which is insane when you think about it. Multiple men from the same projects can all have successful careers, but women are expected to compete for one spot. That's my entire point, Courtney said, her voice gaining strength again. Joy's question wasn't really about my career. It was about reinforcing this idea that Jennifer won and I lost. As if our careers were competition with only one possible winner. And that's exhausting, Joy. It's exhausting to constantly be compared to your friends, to have your accomplishments minimized because someone else's are bigger or more visible. Joy shifted uncomfortably. I hear what you're saying, but I still think you're reading too much into what was meant as a simple question. And I think you're hiding behind that excuse. Courtney fired back immediately. You keep saying it was just a simple question. But Joy, you know how television works.
You know how sound bites work.
You knew exactly what you were doing when you asked that question. You wanted a reaction, and you got one. The only difference is you expected me to laugh it off or give you some diplomatic non-answer. You didn't expect me to actually challenge you. Joy's jaw tightened. You're putting words in my mouth now. Am I? Courtney tilted her head. Then tell me, Joy, what reaction were you hoping for when you called me forgettable? What answer could I possibly have given that would have satisfied you? Did you want me to agree with you? Did you want me to sit here and say, yes, Joy, you're right. I'm forgettable and my career doesn't matter. Or did you want me to make a joke out of it so you could feel better about what you said? The audience was completely riveted. This wasn't the usual View debate about politics or current events. This was raw, personal, and uncomfortable in a way that felt almost too intimate for television. Joy leaned forward again, her voice harder now. You know what, Courtney? Maybe I did expect you to handle it with a little more grace. Maybe I expected someone who's been in this industry as long as you have to have thicker skin than this. There it is again, Courtney said. And there was something almost triumphant in her voice. Now another dismissal. Now it's about me not having thick enough skin. Joy, do you hear yourself? You insult someone, they call you out on it. And your response is that they should just take it better. That's not having thick skin. That's accepting disrespect. And I'm sorry, but I'm done doing
that.
Whoopi interjected, her tone more firm now. Joy, I really think you need to listen to what she's saying. This isn't about being sensitive. This is about basic respect. Joy turned to Whoopi, frustration evident on her face. Whoopi, you and I have gone back and forth on this show 1,000,000 times. We've disagreed. We've argued. We've said things to each other that could be considered insulting, but we don't fall apart over it. That's because you and I have a relationship, Whoopi said calmly. We know each other. We have history. Courtney is a guest on this show, and you came at her with something personal right out of the gate. That's different, and you know it. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Courtney cut in. And even if we did have that kind of relationship, Joy, it still wouldn't make what you said okay. You don't get to hide behind the excuse of being provocative or controversial. You can be both of those things without being cruel. You can ask challenging questions without insulting people.
But you chose not to.
Sunny, who had been taking notes throughout the exchange, spoke up. I want to ask you something, Courtney. What do you think needs to change in how we talk about women in entertainment? Because clearly this conversation has touched on something bigger than just this moment. Courtney took a breath, seeming grateful for a chance to shift the focus slightly. We need to stop comparing women to each other as if there's a hierarchy. We need to stop acting like one woman's success means another woman's failure. We need to expand what we consider valuable in terms of career and achievement. And honestly, we need women in media to stop tearing down other women. Because when Joy sits here and calls me forgettable, she's not just insulting me. She's sending a message to every woman watching that unless you reach a certain level of fame, you don't matter. And that's a terrible message. But that's how the industry works, Joy insisted, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Some people become stars, and some people don't. That's just reality. It's a reality that we can choose to either reinforce or challenge, Courtney countered. And you chose to reinforce it today, Joy. You chose to use your platform to put me in a box labeled forgettable. And I'm choosing to climb out of that box and tell you that you don't get to define my career or my worth based on whether or not I'm as famous as Jennifer Aniston. Alyssa, who seemed genuinely moved by the exchange, added, I think what's powerful about this conversation is that Courtney is showing women that it's okay to push back. It's okay to not accept narratives that diminish you. That's really important. Thank you, Alyssa. Courtney said, and I want to be clear about something. I'm not angry because Joy hurt my feelings, although she did. I'm angry because this kind of rhetoric is damaging. It's damaging to young actresses who are trying to build careers. It's damaging to women in any field who are told that if they're not at the very top, they might as well be invisible. And it's especially damaging when it comes from other women. Joy finally seemed to deflate slightly. Look, clearly we see this differently. I don't think I said anything wrong, but I can see that you're upset. And I'm sorry that you're upset. Courtney actually scoffed. That's not an apology, Joy. That's what people say when they want credit for apologizing without actually taking responsibility for what they did. You're not sorry that I'm upset. You're sorry that I didn't just sit here and take it quietly. The audience actually applauded at that, which seemed to surprise everyone on the panel except Courtney. Joy looked uncomfortable, glancing at Whoopi as if hoping for rescue. But Whoopi just gave her a look that said she was on her own. What do you want from me, Courtney? Joy asked, and for the first time, she sounded less defensive and more genuinely confused. I mean that seriously. What would make this okay? Courtney considered for a moment. I want you to acknowledge that what you said was reductive and insulting. I wanted to acknowledge that calling someone forgettable on national television isn't just an observation. It's a judgment, and it's a mean one. I want you to think about how you would feel if someone did the same thing to you. And I want you to consider that maybe, just maybe, your perspective on success and visibility isn't the only valid perspective. Joy was quiet for a long moment. The studio was so silent you could hear the cameras moving. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was different, less combative. You're right that it was reductive. I can admit that. But I'm not going to sit here and say I was wrong to bring up the different paths that Friends cast members took, because I think that's a legitimate topic of conversation. It absolutely is a legitimate topic, Courtney agreed. But there's a way to have that conversation without making it an attack. You could have asked me about the choices I made, about the projects I pursued, about how I defined success for myself. Instead, you led with forgettable. That was a choice, Joy, and it was the wrong one. Sunny jumped in, clearly trying to find some middle ground. I think we can all agree that this conversation, as difficult as it's been, is valuable. We're talking about real issues that affect women everywhere, not just in entertainment. Absolutely. Alyssa agreed. And I think Courtney has handled this with a lot of grace. Actually, she stood up for herself without backing down, and she's articulated something that a lot of women feel but don't always know how to express. Courtney nodded. I appreciate that. And I want to say one more thing, Joy. I don't think you're a bad person. I don't think you woke up this morning planning to insult me, but I do think you're so used to saying provocative things that you've stopped considering the impact of your words. And that's something worth examining, not just for you, but for anyone with a platform. Joy looked at Courtney for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. Maybe you have a point about that. Maybe I do get comfortable in my role here and forget that not everyone is going to respond the way my co-hosts do. That's all I'm asking. Courtney said just consideration, just thoughtfulness, because words matter. Joy, the things we say about each other, especially as women, they matter. They shape how people think, how they see themselves, how they see each other, and we have a responsibility to use our words carefully. Whoopi, who had been letting the conversation unfold, finally stepped in to wrap things up. I think this has been one of the most real conversations we've had on this show in a long time. Courtney, thank you for not backing down and for pushing us to think more carefully about how we talk about success and about women. Joy, I hope you're hearing what's being said here. Joy nodded, looking somewhat chastened. I am. I really am. Courtney turned to look directly at the camera, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. To anyone watching who's ever been told they're not enough, who's been compared unfavorably to someone else, who's been made to feel invisible or forgettable, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by how famous you are or how many magazine covers you're on or how you stack up against someone else's achievements. Your worth is inherent. You define your own success, and you never ever have to accept someone else's narrative about who you are or what you've accomplished. The audience erupted in applause, standing up as Courtney finished speaking. Even Joy was clapping, though she looked distinctly uncomfortable. Sarah and Alyssa were both visibly emotional, and Sunny was nodding emphatically. Whoopi stood up and walked over to Courtney, pulling her into a hug. That's what we needed to hear, Whoopi said quietly, though her microphone picked it up. Thank you for saying it. As the show cut to commercial, the cameras caught one final moment. Joy stood up and approached Courtney, extending her hand. Courtney looked at it for a moment, then took it, though she didn't smile. They exchanged words that the audience couldn't hear, but the body language told the story. This wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that something real had happened here, something that couldn't just be brushed aside or forgotten. What Courtney Cox did on The View wasn't just stand up for herself. She stood up for every woman who's been told she's not enough, who's been compared and found wanting, who's been dismissed or diminished. She refused to accept a narrative that didn't honor her work, her choices, and her definition of success. And in doing so, she gave permission to countless others to do the same. If you found this story powerful, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we bring you the most compelling stories from Hollywood every single day. And drop a comment below. What do you think? Did Courtney handle this the right way, or should she have taken a different approach? Let us know your thoughts.